everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 27 of Monster. I left like at the worst time for my trip. I left and then came back, and I left at the end of episode 26 and was gone for 10 days and had to just sit there and stew and be like, so Johan. But the good news is I got a lot of comments in the meantime as we were catching up with this episode. So I'm really excited because I thought I had all planned out. I was going to leave for my trip. It was going to be a two-parter. And I'm going to be like, okay, we're going to resolve the stuff with Johan and Carl. And then I'm going to be able to go on my trip. And then we'll start a new arc. No, we're still on Johan and Carl and Lottie and Hans that we'll talk about here in a second. And and Richard our detective. So... But I have a lot of comments before we start, so I want to touch base on those before diving into episode 27. And I have been ready because Monster has just been so good, and I cannot wait to see what's in store, right? So, Carl's VA, who I will have the name of with another commenter here shortly, but Carl's VA is actually the same VA as Panda from Jujutsu Kaisen, according to Alien Forever. So that's interesting. Good to know. That voice sounded familiar, but I don't know if I would have recognized it from Panda. Another commenter who I had lots of notes. Another commenter, Hannah Banana, H Banana 7, said that their VA is Seki Tomokaza. And they said some series like Fate Zero and other things that they've been in, but I don't know those series. So Panda from Jujutsu Kaisen is the only one that I really knew. But that's interesting. Alex Cornejo has a couple comments on here, but one is that we were joking on Patreon that Johan's, kind of like Mob from Mob Psycho 100, a wee little bit, in that they're just chilling out at university with the friends, I thought that was hilarious. But also, Alex noted the nursery rhyme that is brought up about the child of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Several people have commented about it. I thought it was interesting that Tuesday's child is full of grace. So Carl's child is like the innocent. Carl's the innocent one in all of this. Thursday's child has far to go, or in this case, Thursday's child has got to go. like Edmund had to get out of there. And then Friday's child is loving and giving. And God, just the dynamic it's creating with Johan and what we, the audience, know he's done and how he presents himself is so jarring and terrifying that it's something else. But also, Carl's VA, as Alex Cornejo notes, is also Toji from Evangelion. And so that was the one. I was like, where have I heard that voice for? I think it's from Toji, of all things, because it didn't sound like Panda to me from Jujutsu Kaisen. But Toji from Neon Genesis Evangelion, I can get that. So Carl... I hope Carl is all right in this series and ends up having a happy ending. Don't know if that's going to happen. But we were talking about how Mob is kind of like Johan in that they are seemingly, and without spoiling Mob Psycho for anyone, their characters are kind of revered by others. And that reverence is maybe earned or not earned, depending on how you look at it. So... things are interesting, and Teru is kind of like Tenma, maybe, and that they're kind of rivals. I don't know. That's just, I thought that was really funny. So we'll see if that comparison pans out, right? We'll see. I'm finishing up Mob Psycho as we speak, so I'm like, oof, the comparisons. Sack noted that there was a mistranslation in the last episode and that Richard says many years instead of 7 years. So it's not a specific amount of time, because I think it was questioning of like 7 years seems like a long time. No, it was just supposed to be many instead of 7. So thank you for that clarification, Sack. I appreciate it. H Banana, speaking of which, I mentioned them earlier, noted that it's interesting how Johan approaches Lottie and Carl, not the other way around. Johan doesn't wait for them to find him. He goes directly to them, which is interesting. It's like Johan wants to have control of the situation and the upper hand, which kind of ties when Carl meets him at the water tower. He meets him at the water tower. Johan is in the place, he's got the high ground. He's in the place of dominance. So that's rather interesting, right? And even when Tenma comes to Johan in episode 4, Tenma comes to him. Johan's in a place of power whenever Tenma finds him, right? It always seems that no matter what the situation is so far, Johan has to be in the position of power, dominance, or has the upper hand in the situation. He's never in a place of seeming vulnerability unless it's by his own design, which is Fascinating, right? CR notes that Johan so far has been really into blind guys, really into guys that can't see him but can hear his voice and can be influenced by his voice. And I find that rather fascinating, that it's that whole idea of only being able to hear something but not see the full picture, right? And that seems to be tied to Johan's character. You hear certain things, like when you hear him talk and his ideas, you're like, oh, he seems like a great guy. But then when you see him in action and you see the things surrounding him, your mind kind of goes, wait, there's a red flag here. I shouldn't totally trust this. So it almost seems like Johan never wants to present the full picture of himself, because that might be not what he wants you to see in him. So that's rather interesting. Pop-Tart Milkman, love that handle, noted that it shouldn't be Schubert. That's actually perhaps a mistranslation. It maybe should be Schuvald. Schuvald instead of Hans von Schubert. It should be Hans von Schuvald. But they also noted that it's kind of, I haven't gotten the volume of the manga that has this story in it. I will probably likely, as we get a few more episodes in, I'll probably order volume 3. And then when we get down to me showing you all the volume and kind of reviewing it, I'll probably make note of if it's Schuvald or Schubert. To me, it doesn't necessarily matter, but that is interesting to know. They also talked about like Lunge versus Runge, and in the manga it's Lunge, so I'm sticking with Lunge, but interesting. And then Alex Cornejo, again, pointed out that, Johan's ideas that he presents in episodes 26, they do end up becoming the UN Children's Bill of Rights. So what a lovely person. I was like, their exact words were, Johan's ideas would eventually become the UN's Children's Bill of Rights or whatever it's called. And I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, it's just this awful disconnect of Johan presenting these amazing ideas and this humanity, but then it all, if you've known Johan and everything surrounding him up until this point, it just feels like saccharine. It just feels fake, but at the same time, it's so convincing that you're just like, what do I do with this? And so I don't know what to do with it. I really don't. So, but yeah, we're going to watch episode 27. This is part 3 of our adventures of Carl and Hans and Lottie and Johan, Mr. Friday, and what we're going to do with this. So I don't honestly know at this point. I won't be surprised if Carl and Lottie and them get off scot-free and they're totally like safe and Johan just does what he does and just saunters along the way. That's great. But then on the other hand, if he just completely like throws them under the bus and wrecks stuff, I guess I won't be surprised. But at this point, the show has made you so unassuming that you just can't tell where it's going. And that's insanity to me. So I guess we'll find out, right? So we'll see, right? So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to watch episode 27 of Monster and just see what we get. But we're going to start this episode and find out here in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to turn the sound down just a hair so it doesn't blow our ears out. And let's go. Oh my gosh. So this episode, not going the way that I thought it would at all. At all. And that's not in a bad way whatsoever. First and foremost, Richard. I've never encountered an anime like this where the side characters, where the mangaka has the ability to take a side character that we've seen for a grand total of maybe like 12 minutes of screen time and make you instantly fall in love with their character and root for them and want things to go for them. Like Richard hits me at like a visceral level. Like we get lots of little visual clues in this episode especially that kind of point to Richard's character, but just seeing his character and how he's trying to overcome the demons surrounding him and resist them, and it's so good. It's great, right? And then you have, meanwhile, it's almost like the audience is being tested, being like, well, you've seen like Richard's perhaps done some bad things, so maybe he'll be fine. Look at Johan, maybe he'll be fine. But I'm like, no, I still don't. It's the craziest thing. Like, on the one hand, which the reason why I think I'm so eager to root for Richard and him coming from a place of it's interesting, right? It's interesting. I'm gonna have to bring Whiteboard Coon out, damn it. Okay. I was like, why am I fooling myself into thinking that I'm not going to need Whiteboard Coon for this? Why do I think that that's not going to be the case, right? Because there's some interesting things that this show is trying to put forth to us, the audience, in terms of redemption and how we root for characters and how we view them and their values and things like that. And so there's this interesting parallel kind of pulling apart here about characters like Richard and then characters like Johan. And I'm going to put them here. And then we'll have Carl over here. Okay, because there are three main characters at this point in this arc. I like this arc doesn't really involve Tenma whatsoever. Tenma's just not even a part of it. And I feel like, is this arc concluding with this episode, or is it going to tie into the next episode? I feel like it is important to establish several things going on at the moment, right? So many little things have been... At the first, I was surprised by some of the things Johan was saying to Carl. I was like, I expected him to, like, you expect Johan to act a certain way, and then he doesn't. But Johan's playing the long game. Johan's playing the long game, and he is so manipulative, and he is so thought out. Like, in my mind, he's so thought out things that he's going to use this for, that it starts to come together at the end of the episode, and you're like... This is what you've been planning the whole time. Oh my God. Okay. But before we get to that, because this episode has a lot of stuff going on, I want to make note of with Richard and his character. So Richard's thing is that he was drunk and he killed a man. And the man was 16 and he was a serial murderer. All right. So clearly the idea was that even though it was a kid, I mean, it was a kid, which is part of the problem, but it was a young man who had murdered someone. And then the problem was that Richard went beyond his jurisdiction, was also drunk when it happened, and shot this man and killed him. And now it's like he clearly has this PTSD from the incident. And he's not only dealing with that, he's also trying to stay sober and reconnect with his daughter. Like that's his whole goal. He wants to reconnect to his daughter and like rebuild and move forward. Even though the counselor tells him, he's like, you can't forget the past. You're going to have to carry that truth with you. And it seems like at some point he's going to be put on trial about the murder, and he's going to have to like come forward with all of that and explain what happened and deal with those ramifications. So, but Richard, you want to root for him because we see his side of the story, in that we see how he's not making excuses for himself. He's not saying like, oh, it was because this and this. He's like, no, that's how it was, but I'm trying to become a better person. And you actively see him try to be a better person. Like he resists drinking. He like tries to, he never raises his voice. He never gets frustrated like about the daughter situation with his I'm assuming it's his ex-wife. Like he doesn't ever like raise his voice or get mad. He just rolls and flows with it. And you just end up being so sad for him and you want to root for him. And what's interesting is that it's funny that as that situation, it's like, well, here's someone that did something very bad. He murdered someone, has clearly done it. We know we have proof of that. This episode is called Proof, which is so fun. But we have proof that he has done this, but we also have proof that he's actively working to become a better person. And you want to root for him for it. The thing about Johan is we don't get to see Johan like we see Richard. We get to see him by himself. We get inside Richard's head. We see the PTSD. We see the thoughts of what he sees, like when he's crossing, like that, the symbolism of that whole scene on the block at the stoplight. We got to just break that whole thing down. But we get to see Richard firsthand from a like observer first person point of view. We've never had that opportunity with Johan. Every time we see Johan, it is from the outside looking in, from someone else's perspective. We see Johan how Carl sees him. We see Johan how Tinma sees him, how Eva sees him, how the baby sees him. We see Johan how everyone else sees him, Wolf, Nina, everybody. But we have never like sat one-on-one alone in a room with Johan to see what Johan's actually thinking. And that's what makes him so scary and antagonistic, is because we feel as the audience removed from him. We don't have that connection to what he's thinking at all. And so because we don't have that, it just paints this very creepy portrait where we feel a disconnect and we can't quite, this mangaka, and the disconnect feels even greater because the mangaka's done such a great job of having us be one-on-one with these little side characters. Like Richard, we've known Richard for 2 episodes and already I'm like rooting for him to like win the series. And we've had that personal one-on-one with him. But Johan, who we've known since the beginning, we've never had that one-on-one with, so we have no clue what he's thinking. And we don't have that connection. And so it's really hard to root for him even when things are happening. So Johan, we know, the only person we've seen Johan kill has been Junkers. I know I'm spelling that wrong, but Johan killed him. And to make the argument, Junkers was not a serial murderer like the man that Richard killed. He just robbed a bank and he was an accomplice to Johan. That's all we know. We know other deaths are tied to Johan, but we've not seen the proof that Johan killed them. We have suspect and logical reason to believe that he's tied to the murders, that he's hired people to do it based on the word of others, but we have not physically seen proof that all of that is true, right? And so we've made assumptions based on word of mouth. Like word of mouth has created this idea of who Johan is, which is interesting because it's in disconnect from what we see Lottie and Carl experience, which is Johan being helpful, being kind, being someone to give good advice, being someone to teach Carl Latin. Like Tinma has in his mind that Johan is this very dangerous person. But from what we've seen of Johan interacting with Carl and Lottie and them, he doesn't seem dangerous at all. Seems like a sweet kid with big ambitions and a little dream on his shoulder, and he's just going to go out and get a children's Bill of Rights and just helping Carl reconnect with his dad. Like, seems like such a nice guy, right? Seems like he's doing nothing wrong, right? But my theory is, based on the end of this episode, and we're going to go through this episode, but based on the end of it, my theory is that Johan has now become Schubert. I'm going to call him Schubert because in the episode they say Schubert. In Schubert's secretary. Imagine that. His secretary handling all of his things, right? Handling his things. And he's a man that can be trusted. Trusted by Carl and his dad. I feel like Johan has positioned himself in the best place possible. Because at first I thought, well, Johan's going to try to pass him off as Schubert's son. And this episode makes several red herrings to make you believe that that's going to be the case. And we'll go through it in this episode. But no. Johan is not that simple. Johan's like, oh no, this is a much broader game. And Johan, God, he's masterful because this is genius. But we need to go through this episode. So the conversation, we go back to Richard. The conversation we have at the very beginning of this episode is so telling. I said in the reaction that it's like a show not tell. Very much so. Like we have Richard and his wife, or ex-wife, we assume, and they're sitting there at the cafe together, and she is very stiff. Her posture is very stiff. She's very blunt. She really does not want to be there. And he's asking just chit-chat questions like you look well. How's work going? Is it going well? Is everything okay? And she just says yes. There's no chit-chat. We're not elaborating. We're just telling you yes. And he says, oh, that's good to hear. And she won't even look at him. She's just sitting there looking at the table like she desperately doesn't want to be here, but she's assuaging him by being here. And he's like, is Rosemary doing well? And she is. And he says she has lots of friends. And so he's like, okay, that's great. And it's so tense between them. He says, that's great. It's like the most natural, tense, awkward conversation. He's like, so she's getting used to school. And that's when the ex-wife is like, I can't do this. Like in that moment, the moment he's like trying to make chit chat and talk about their daughter, she's like, I can't. Like clearly there is no love. There is no love for Richard from Rosemary's mom. And I kind of respect her for this because the mom, I respect the mom for this because unlike Eva, who is a very emotional and would probably be like super pathos driven and just like dramatic, this one is not. But you get the idea from their conversation, the way she wants to cut it short, the way she wants to get out of there, the way she doesn't want to deal with this, is that Richard was in a very bad place. And I don't think it's something as simple as, oh, he was just a drunk that was maybe bad at his job, or he was like Lunge, where he was an absent father, or someone that dove all into his work. The way that she acts and the way that she presents herself, it makes it sound like he was abusive, is what it makes it sound like. Now, do we have proof of that? No, we do not. We don't have proof of that. But just her attitude, it gives you the impression that it wasn't just the fact that he was drinking that was the issue. It was likely his behavior while drunk. She doesn't want to be around him. She doesn't want to give him the time of day. She doesn't want to have any reconciliation. She just wants to say, nope, okay, fine. I met you because you asked. I'm being courteous. Okay, bye. Like it's very solemn and to the point. Which is sad because the Richard we see is a sober Richard that's trying. And what we don't have proof of and what we don't see is the Richard that she knows that we haven't met. The Richard that has drunk, that has had that demon, and how that demon has affected him. We don't get to see that. So that's so masterful of this show to be so subtle about it. And all he wants, and she is courteous enough to bring a picture of Rosemary. She's courteous enough to give him that. And he's like, can I see her? And she doesn't seem to want that to happen. He's like, we can meet right here. And she says, I'll ask to see if she wants to see you. He's like, I've stopped drinking and I'm getting my life straightened out to how it was before. This might be the first time in my life I've been this stable. I understand the importance of things that I've lost. And she's standing up at this point. So it's like the woman does not want to acknowledge him at all. Like he apparently, whatever he did, like he says that at this point, he's the most stable he's been in his entire life. And that should tell us, the audience, that he's been in a really bad place. And she's like, And that makes, it seems like her and the other police chief, like the people around him, know that he's capable of being a good person. But he's been so bad in the past that it seems like they're giving him the benefit of the doubt only enough to not be, they're just being indifferent. They're not mad at him. They're not upset. They're just like, okay. And that's almost worse than being upset in some regards. When somebody treats you, my best friend, they're like, if I start treating you like I'm indifferent, that's a bad sign. Like if I'm angry and upset, it means I care. But if I'm indifferent, I don't care anymore. I'm just like, okay. And that's how she feels. It feels like she's beyond caring. She's like, that's great, you've got your life together, but whatever you did in the past, it hurt us enough that we don't want to deal with it. You just go do your own thing. And that's so, like, you just feel for Richard because we've not seen that side of him. She says, I'll let her decide whether or not she'll see you. And her eyes are so cold. So he's either done something to her or something to the daughter. And it's so bad to the point where she doesn't think the girl's going to want to see him. But we'll talk about that. Because he kind of laments about it. And he's like, oh, well, sure. Like, he's just, okay. And then she just leaves him. And again, there's that metaphor if he looks over, like he sees his daughter and she's so pretty. But we don't know. Like, the thing of it is, we don't know what she looks like now. Like, is she older? Is this recent? We have no idea. We don't know. He just wants to see his daughter. And when he looks over and sees the people drinking, the one guy looks like the man in the ED, and the alcohol is a metaphor of the monster. Like it's the demon that gets inside of you that takes him over and makes you feel invincible but destroys you from within. And that's what that represents to Richard. And I give Richard so many props because I have friends who have become sober, and sobriety is hard, especially if you were someone that was addicted to alcohol. It's hard. Any type of addiction and getting over it is difficult. And I have friends that are either sober or have become sober, and it's a constant battle, especially when there are so many pressures of those demons around. But seeing how Richard has such a goal that he wants to see his daughter again, like it's so beautiful, right? And you just want to root for him. So I was kind of hoping that the counselor would tell them about Carl, but we don't get, I mean, it becomes apparent at that point that the whole idea of the counselor, like he's really just there for Richard's stability and to help back him up and keep him on the right path. But as far as, it almost seems like that whole moment of him dismissing Carl's picture, being like, I'm not a fortune teller, it seemed like it was establishing that this guy is not going to be important to the story anymore. It's like we've moved on from that plot point, and now we're touching on he's just a rock for Richard, who's trying to stay sober and stay in the path of progress moving forward. Because he's like, whatever happens, don't drink. He's like, you've got to tackle the case you got fired from. Are you ready for that? Are you ready to come to terms with what you've done in the past and move forward? And Richard seems like he is, and you just want to root for him. You just want to be like, you just want to, like, him to have, I just want him to see his daughter. That's literally what I want. I want him to see his daughter. My fear is that his daughter's going to show up and she's got some visible sign of abuse that's from him. And we, the audience, are going to be like, this is clearly something horrible that happened. And it's going to taint our views of him, right? Because right now we see Richard as this underdog, but there's these undercurrents of he's done really bad things in the past. And if we know about those things, is that going to impair our view of him? I do like the counselor saying, you can't be 100% right on everything. People who get things 100% are boring. And I'm like, that's really fun, because it's like, no, everyone has little imperfections. Maybe even Johan. We don't know. We don't know about Johan yet. We are getting little bits and pieces of him, but I do love... Okay, we get to the traffic light scene, right? And Huckleberry is begging me to play with him. But we get to the traffic light scene. I love the symbolism throughout all this entire scene. This entire scene is so well done. It's just it's visually so perfect that you see, first of all, you see the stoplight go to red, which means we're stopping and we're having a moment of reflection. Then you see that there's this building that's being constructed upon. It has all of the risers and stuff around it, so it's casting a shadow, right? It's casting a shadow, and currently it's the shadow that Richard is under. And he sees the girls laughing, which are teenage girls. And what's interesting is the building kind of goes to this weird, has this weird vertigo effect on him, and Richard starts to get impacted on it. He gets a PTSD moment of thinking about the serial killer that he murdered, right? And his vision starts to go blurry, and then he sees the kid reaching for the gun. And the kid reaching for the gun, he sees it, and just the horror on Richard's face. He sees the kid reaching for the gun, and the kid's smiling, and he doesn't even look like a 16-year-old kid. He looks like an adult, right? But all Richard sees is him shooting him in the head. And then screaming, realizing what he did. So, and just the camera shaking and it just getting so disturbing. Monster. But what's interesting about that is that's how he views it. But we've heard that he was drunk and shot the serial murderer. So when you think of that explanation, you think, oh, he was drunk. He wasn't cognizant or aware of what he was doing. But here we see Richard have a very clear view of how he felt in that moment. So it's little things like that make you kind of appreciate Richard's character. But again, we just had a statement and the proof of what actually happened versus what Richard thinks. So it creates this kind of situation where there is a little bit of an unreliable narrator. Because from what we know, and I'm going to put a question mark with Johan, but from what we see of Richard, it seems to, in some regards, fly against what we've heard about him and how we see others interact with him. His attitude now seems to fly in the face of that. So it creates kind of this unreliable narrator effect where it's like maybe we are being deceived by how Richard is here. Maybe because we don't have the full picture of him, we only see this one side of him, and so that's what we're basing our assumptions on. But if we saw the full picture, we would maybe judge Richard or have a different opinion about him. It's kind of what it's suggesting, right? But again, I love the idea that Richard is so shocked and shook by this moment, and then the light turns green, and he makes a decision to move out of the shadows and into the light. Like, that is a distinct visual display for us, the audience, to see that he keeps moving forward. He has this moment in the shadows where the demons lurk on him, and he makes a choice. He's like, all this is coming back to me, but he makes a decision to move forward. And it's beautiful, right? He makes a decision. And everything in the shadows, like when we first see it, it's all in the light. The bar signs are in the light. But then when you see the view from outside of Richard, you see there's the shadows over here and Richard's walking in the light. So all those temptations are constantly in front of him. And just the showing of like the Adam's apple bobbing, and he just keeps thinking about drinking, but he just keeps moving forward instead because he has a goal. He wants to see his daughter, right? So we go back to his studies, like we go back to where he is, and he has all these pictures of Carl, and he claims to be the son of Mr. Schubert, and he's in the house. So it seems like he's a man living by himself, keeps this place so clean. Like, I don't know if it's like a whole wing that he lives on, or if it's just like an apartment there, or if he lives in that whole big damn house. He could live in the whole damn house. We don't know. But I can't believe I like this housekeeper's like, we keep it so clean. And again, that idea of how he is changing to be better. Like, he talks about how, oh, my house wasn't always like this. Like, it creates more of like, okay, before his house was in disarray, but now he's got a cleaning lady. He keeps it tidy. It's part of that transformation he's trying to do to become a better person, right? And it just makes you appreciate him so much more. And then we see, now all the pictures he has of her are of her from the same age. So it makes me wonder if she's really older or if she's the same age as she is now. I want to see her. I want him to see her before the end of his arc as a character. Part of it is suggesting that this is the end of the arc because it's like Carl and the dad got together and then Johan was announced as secretary. Like, everything works out, but I think it's a 4-parter. I think there's another episode at least, because we've not got resolution with Richard's character, or we've not at least gotten to a point where we can like leave Richard's character over here and move on with the rest of the story, right? Like we've done with so many other characters. But we see him following Carl and Lottie and all of that, and then he goes to meet his daughter at the diner. And it's almost like he has the picture with her. And part of me was wondering if he kept the picture with him, the picture of her, to like keep him sober, to like be a constant reminder of why he's doing this, or if he has not seen her in so long that he's forgotten what she looks like and he needs the photo to remind him of her. That's the thing too. We don't know from there the reason why he has it. We can just guess about it. And then the wife comes in and the mom comes in and she doesn't sit down or anything. She just comes in to tell him that the girl's not meeting him. And Richard's reaction is just, he's like, I guess that'll do. Like, he doesn't get mad. He doesn't have an outburst. He just is like, makes sense. It's almost like he didn't expect her to come, but he was hopeful, right? And so the big connection with Richard and Carl, though, and I'm going to kind of move this over here, is that Richard wants to know, like, why? Why does Carl not want to be with his father? That's going to be a big thing now, because it seems like that's going to be a big thing now too, because it's going to be like, okay, well, his father has accepted Carl as his son, because we need to put that on here. He's accepted Carl as his son. So I'm like, Johan, did you just mess up Carl and his adopted parents? Because Carl's foster parents, the Lindners parents, the Lindners wanted to adopt him. And it seemed like Carl, the thing about it is, and I understand why Carl is torn, and we'll get to the diner scene with them. I get why Carl is torn. This is not a very easy situation. But Richard is trying to figure out, why would Carl not want to see his father? And I feel like Richard is trying to, and what I wanted was, when he was tempted to drink, I was like, no, try to figure out about Carl, why he is the way that he is with his father, and maybe that will help you figure out why your daughter doesn't want to see you. Because there seems to be a correlation there, right? There seems to be a correlation where Carl's mom didn't want Carl to see his father until he was an adult, because only then would he be able to understand the weight of possibly why his father left her. And as a kid, he would never understand that. And so maybe if Richard finds that out, it can be like, maybe his daughter doesn't want to see him because she's afraid that she won't view him fairly. Maybe she's terrified of him. Maybe the mom has been like, you need to grow up and realize why your dad did the things that he did. Maybe it's a similar situation to Carl. I feel like the stories of Richard and his daughter, Rosemary, are paralleling Schubert and Carl. Like, that they did bad things in the past and their kids were driven away from them. But now in Schubert's case, Carl has come back. And maybe if Richard can look into that enough, he can realize, maybe if Richard can interview Carl after the fact, when it comes out that he's a son, that he can find out why he waited all this time, and we'll connect that to Rosemary. Maybe we'll see. That would be really cool if that happened, to give Richard some hope that maybe I won't see my daughter now, but maybe when she's ready, I can see her. And the only thing I can do between now and then is just stay on this right path and do it for her. Like, that's what I'm hoping is going to be the case, right? I'm hoping that will be the case so that he can end up seeing her, because I want her to. I don't want him to be tempted and drink again. And like, all the visuals, like him like praying, him like just being so tempted, and then at the very end, he's like, nope. He looks so dead-eyed when he looks at that drink, like that's just going to be it. And then he ends up leaving. And then we cut immediately to Carl. So again, it feels like the stories are meant to be intertwined. They're meant to be connected and threaded together, right? And Carl's thing is that Carl says that he doesn't want to seem selfish to his father. He doesn't want to seem like someone that's just there for the money. He wants to understand his father, why he did the things that he does. And it's understandable. Like, the thing that's so heartbreaking about the scene with his adopted parents is that, is that Carl clearly appreciates everything his adopted parents have done for him, his foster parents have done, and he appreciates them, and he clearly loves them. But there's always that little nagging of, my mother meant for me to find my father, because she gave him the lucky rabbit's foot. Which I'm glad, that little thing at the end when he held out the hand, it was like the fur there. I was like, what the hell is that? Is that part of a toupee? I was like, what is that part of Schubert's old toupee? He'll only know this. It's made from Angora hair. Like, no, it was a rabbit's foot, a mangled rabbit's foot, because like it only had like 2 bean pads on it, you know. But she gave him the rabbit's foot, so she clearly wanted him to meet with him eventually. And I feel like for Carl loving his mother and being separated from her, he wants to live out her goal for him to meet his father, but he also wants to understand his father. And it's his dad, you know, even though he's not been there for him, there's a mystery there and an intrigue there. And he's been around him so long reading that he wants to understand him. And so it puts Carl in a very difficult position, because he wants to treat his foster parents justly because they've been so kind and considerate, but he also wants to connect with his biological family that he's missed all these years. So it puts Carl in a very, very precarious situation. So the big question is, like, is Carl going to choose the adoption or to stay with his father? What is he going to choose? Because can he do both? Can he live with his adopted parents and still, that's the thing. thing. That's what's going to become interesting, is what does Carl end up choosing, right? What does Carl end up choosing? Is he going to stay with the foster parents who loved him, or is he going to stay with the father who has loved him? And that's the problem. The problem is that I don't think Schubert is using Carl at all. He genuinely loves Carl, but so does his adopted parents. And that creates such a burden. And what I would think the easy answer is he's like, I want to stay around you, Dad, and be near you, and I love you, but because I don't want the money, that was always the thing. He's like, I don't want the money. I'm not interested in any of that. I will let my foster parents adopt me because that will make them happy, but I'll also stay by you and keep reading to you because that'll make you happy. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think that there's going to be corruption there. I think that Johan's influence, and I'm going to say it's Johan's influence, I think there's going to be, is he going to be corrupted and stick with the dad? And I say corrupted, and maybe that's not the right word for it, but is he going to stick with the father and be tied to the money, or is he going to stick with the foster parents? Now, if he goes with the dad, with Schubert, then I think it's going to play into it's going to play right into Johan's hands. But I think if he went with the adopted parents, it's going to go completely against what Johan expects, and that will throw a wrench in things. So we'll talk about that more here in a second, but I want to go back to, he goes to read to Schubert, and Schubert tells him about how he's gotten better. He's like, oh, I've taken lessons from Johan. And Schubert's like, oh, he's perfect. Johan is so perfect. He's not only perfect at Latin, but he's complete in many forms of study in law and business. And he has a handsome face. And I was like, you're blind. But Carl gets a little bit jealous of Johan, right? Because he's like, if a young man like him were your real son, what would you think? Which is what we've been wondering as the audience this whole time. Like, what would you do with that? And then he smiles. He smiles, thinking if that were the case. And Carl gets jealous because he's like, because I feel like Carl deep down has wanted to impress his dad to prove that he's a good son, to get that validation, right? And to like prove that his dad was wrong in leaving him, that he's a good kid. And so there is at first a little bit of jealousy, but it quickly wanes. But Carl's such a nice guy that the jealousy doesn't last long, right? Because he goes to Johan, right after that, and tells him what the deal is. Now, this whole scene with Johan, to be clear, when he goes there to Johan, his back is turned to Carl. Like Johan, he has his back turned for most of the conversation at first, which is a sign that you can't trust what people are thinking. If their back's turned to you, you don't see what they're thinking, you don't see their facial expressions. It's usually a visual clue of untrustworthiness, or that you don't know what they're thinking. And so when he turns around, and it's like he's contemplating what to do. Like he's thinking about the plan to put in motion. Because Carl's like, well, you'd be the perfect son according to him. To be honest, I was jealous. Even though it's obvious you're better than me. Like, Carl's so nice! And I'm like, Carl, quit comparing yourself to Johan. Like, that's not a fair comparison. He's like, after doing that, I felt disgusted with myself. Like, Carl's just a genuinely kind person. And I don't want him to get corrupted. But, we'll talk about this. And so Johan's like, well, why didn't you tell him? Why don't you tell him that you're his real son? Why not? Why don't you do that? And Carl's like, no. He's like, because if I tell him, he's like, I just pointed out how you would be a perfect son. And he smiled. So if I say that I'm his son now, you know what's going to happen? He's going to be jealous. He's going to think that I was jealous and I'm trying to persuade him, that I'm trying to trick him, and that I'm after his money. Like, Carl very much has a sensible reason why he doesn't want to tell that. And this is what's so intriguing about this scene, is that Johan is very adamant that Carl gets Schubert to believe him. And he's very adamant. He's like, you must have something. You must have something that will persuade him. Come on, don't you have something to let him know you're his real son? And he's like, you clearly want him to be proud of you. That's why you're learning Latin from me to teach him, to read to him. And then Carl's like, well, I'm going to quit anyway. He's like, I'm kind of done. I don't want to do it anymore. I want out of this whole thing. I realize it's moot point because he loves you as his son, not me. But the moment that Johan gets him to reveal the token, he's like, I don't have any intention of showing this thing to him or claiming to be his son. My foster parents are coming to see me next week. And we don't see Johan's reaction, right? We just see him slowly and creepily walk towards Carl, which again is painting this image of how we should be afraid of him. He says, I've made up my mind. When they come, I'm going to. And he's like, oh, I see. Like, he doesn't let him finish, right? So Johan's like, well, then could you entrust the talisman with me? And the thing about it is that when he asks for the talisman, we, the audience, who have every right to be suspicious of Johan still, because there's been such red flags, conflicting flags, things that just don't match up. When he asks for the talisman, we are meant to believe, as the audience, that he is going to try and win Schubert over. That's what we think is going to happen. But I was trying to think in the reaction, like, okay, if Johan took it and used it to convince him that he was his son, how would Carl react to that? And I feel like Johan realizes at this point that Carl would react very badly. That Carl genuinely does want his father to know that he's his son. He just is such a kind-hearted person, he can't commit to going through with it, right? Because he's afraid of what his father will think. And so I feel like maybe in that moment when Johan was mulling things over, he's like, okay, I can't take the talisman and pass myself off as his kid because Carl will get suspicious. We've talked too much. We've revealed too much to one another. If Carl goes to the police suspecting me, then that is going to draw a lot of attention to myself, and I don't want that. Johan's like, I don't want attention drawn to myself. I like doing things from the shadows. Carl and I have communicated enough that if I go through with this, knowing now how serious Carl is about his love for his father, it's going to backfire on me. It's not going to work. If that was the case, that's what's going through my mind. So he decides instead, he tells Schubert about Carl. And because Schubert knows and loves Johan so much, he believes him. Because as we established in the last episode, Johan has von Schubert in the palm of his hand, right? He literally got him to be convinced by the apple. So he could probably convince him of anything at this point, right? But you as the audience, we're all led to believe that Johan is going to become the son by that. And then we cut to Carl meeting with his adopted parents, his foster parents, and they clearly want him to be their kid. So I feel like maybe Johan I feel like maybe Schubert was also, he didn't want Carl to leave as his reader, and maybe Johan was seeing that things could fall apart and go against his favor if he didn't keep them tied together at this point. And the foster parents are a big wrench in his plans, because if Carl goes along with them and cuts his ties with Schubert, it could mess up certain plans for Johan. Johan's playing a long game. He's going to use Carl for something. I'm bound and determined. I can't be convinced otherwise. This series is trying its darndest to make me want to treat Johan like we're treating Richard. This show wants me to think that, oh, well, yeah, sure, Johan killed Junkers, but he's trying to do better. He's trying to make a kid's bill of rights. He's trying to connect this father back with his son. He's trying to do all these great things and be a nice guy. You know, maybe he's trying to move forward past everything. But the weirdest thing is that with Richard, I believe it. Because we've seen firsthand inside Richard's head, and we know what he's thinking, and we know that he's being genuine. We don't know that with Johan. We don't see inside his head, so I can't trust him. I'm like, no, because there's too many things that could tie, like the fact that Johan was with Edmund before he died, the fact that he's probably killed Edmund or led to his death, his suicide. There's just too many factors there, right? That lead you to not trust him. But the thing about it is, I feel like Johan's like, oh no, Carl might just leave this whole situation. I feel like he's going to use Carl. I feel like he is going to use Carl somehow. Somehow it's going to be playing into this, right? And I want to get a little further before I get my tinfoil hat theorying on and do that. But Carl says, you are my true parents. And it seems like right at that point is when Schubert calls to get him to read Latin for the last time. And does it on the spot. Now, the story that he chooses seems like it's very intentional by the mangaka. And so he says, from Aulis to Lemnos. He says, that would be great. And so he says that deep sea of mystery, which is basically what we're in. We're in a deep sea of mystery. At this point, it's like, what is Johan's overall goals? How is he going to use Carl? What's the point? Why has he lured these rabbits into the trap, right? Wasn't it wishing for the death of Phoebus? Phoebus. And so talking about, I'm going to put down here, the death of Phoebus being wished for. And saying, doesn't Cerberus have anything to look forward to other than the deaths of our sons and daughters? And it's basically saying, isn't the hounds of hell coming for our children? Which is terrifying. Doesn't that wish for the children to be taken away? Which kind of relates to Carl and his dad in this whole situation. Saying, go forth, says Zeus, go forth. And then there's the idea of going forth. That God's saying, no, keep moving forward, which again, ties to Richard, ties to Carl. Like, it's almost like saying, Carl, go ahead and tell him you're his son. It almost seems like he realizes that as he reads, dance at the temple of the gods. Saying, like, basically YOLO. Being like, this is your dad you're talking to on the phone for the last time, perhaps. The last time you'll ever see him. Tell him you're his son. Like, it seems like the passage is just urging him to think that. And he says, gods of Juno who live in the earth, the sea, and the heavens. He says, everything is telling me from the summit of the Parthenon, steal the forbidden apple of Campania. So it's like saying, and we go back to the whole apple analogy from the last episode, in the Garden of Eden and all this, of that's forbidden. He's like, even though Carl knows that he should just go with his foster parents who love him and just accept that he's not going to be his son's child, it's like there's a voice telling him to keep going with it. And I feel so bad for Carl. He just cries like, bring it all here, seek out my heart. Like, in his heart, he wants to confess that he's his son, right? He wants to confess. And you feel so good because you're like, you feel good that Carl gets reunited with his dad. That he gets reunited, and like he's just right there. Like, that was beautiful. And he had the hand, and then he says, why did you hide this from me? And like, Carl with the tears in his eyes, it's so sweet, right? It's so sweet. He's like, it was a charm to bring you good fortune when you were born. He's like, I'm sorry I've caused you such pain. And like, the dad apologizes and everything, and for everything that he's done, he apologizes and is just sitting there crying. And then Carl runs to him and they just accept that he's his dad and it's his son, right? And it's very touching. It's very sweet that this old man, after years of whatever happened between him and his wife and Carl as a kid, it seems like in this moment they can all move forward from it and they realize they still love each other, which gives you hope for Richard and the daughter, right? But then it was like, well, that was really nice. How did Schubert get there, right? How did he manage to get to where Carl is? And he says, it's all thanks to him. Like, he's the one that told me everything. He's going to be working for me as a secretary. He says, yeah, as he walks in the room, a young man I can trust. And then, for a show that is trying to red herring us into trusting Johan and believing he's a great person, when you end the shot of your episode with a creepy zoom in and like dong dong, like terrifying music, and it's Johan, don't know if that's doing it for me, But here's the thing. I fully believe, and the question is Carl going to question like Johan becoming a secretary? Because here's the thing. Johan set him up perfectly in this. Johan, I was not thinking of the long game that Johan's playing here. Because you'd be like, oh, well, he's going to pass himself off as Schubert's son. That's suspicious. That's suspicious. No, he's going to be the secretary. He's just the one that files the paperwork. That's all he does. If something mysteriously tragic happens to Schubert after all this is said and done, then the finger to point to is going to be the mysterious man who's come out of the shadows to be his son at the last minute. That's going to be what's suspicious, who just happened to be friends with the guy that committed suicide that was trying to pass himself off as Schubert's son. What a funky connection, right? Meanwhile, Johan has been the secretary for a blind man's paperwork. And has Schubert in the palm of his hand. There is so much he could do with that power. So he could get it to where if something happens to Schubert, the blame could fall on Carl, the mysterious kid that showed up out of nowhere and was somehow his legitimate son, and could have paperwork filed that he's had Schubert sign off on because Schubert will trust anything that Johan says that leaves everything to Johan. So it may just all work out in Johan's favor that he could get Carl into some serious trouble, get rid of Schubert, and run off with all the money because a blind man put his utmost trust not in his son, but the man doing his paperwork. It's genius. And I'm terrified. I thought by the end of this episode, I was going to be like, oh, Carl's going to be fine. He's connected with his dad. It's going to be great. And now I'm like, oh shit, no, things are not good. Johan is maybe setting this whole thing up to just be to just completely blow up in the faces of Carl and Lottie at this point, who knows. But the fascinating thing is that, yeah, we want to root for Richard. We want to root for Carl. We've seen both of these people are good people, but we've seen how it's so tempting for them to be corrupted. Like Richard with the drinking and Carl with trying to choose. The one thing I don't want is for Carl to forego the adoption by his birth parents and be, what I'm afraid is going to happen is that Schubert is going to give Carl an ultimatum. You can either become my son by right, or you can go with your foster parents who have taken care of you since birth. Not since birth, but for the longest time of all his foster parents he's been with. My fear is that Carl's going to choose the dad, which is going to break the hearts of the foster parents because they were so happy he was going to accept them as his true parents, and it would mean Carl lied to them. What I'm afraid is that's going to happen, and not only is Carl going to ruin that relationship with them, or at least taint it to the point where it can't quite be what it was, but that also by accepting that being the heir, it's going to kind of go against what Carl's always established and that he doesn't want that. And it's going to be like that corruption. And then Johan's going to take advantage of that and be like, well, what if something happens to Schubert and we blame it on you? That's what I'm afraid of. That's what I'm afraid is going to happen. I still feel like it's going to be connected to Richard. Richard's still connected to this case somehow. And I feel like he's still connected to Carl. I want to watch episode 28 so badly. And I'm probably not going to wait a week until I watch it because I can't. But my big question is then, from here, I feel like maybe we'll get another episode or half an episode to wrap up whatever this arc is, or at least to tie Richard back into Carl. The question is, where does Tenma come in on this? Because for the last several episodes, we haven't had Tenma. Where does he's on his way to Munich. He's on his way here. We don't know in the timeline how far out Tenma is from when the events of these episodes are happening. But the big question is, what is Tenma going to do once he gets to Munich? How involved is he going to be? Is he going to meet Richard? Is he going to meet Carl? Is he going to meet Schubert? Are all these people going to be dead by the time he gets there? We don't know. But I'm really, really excited to see what possibly could happen. So yeah. I don't trust Johan at all still. I can't. There's too much doubt that's there, but damn it, I guess we'll see what happens, right? Right? So, I'm very curious to know your thoughts down below. I feel like I need to see episode 28 and see what happens next. I'm probably going to wait a couple days just to be safe, but then I'm going to watch it. And see what ends up happening, right? So, in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Monster. Bye.